Iran's leader orders attack on Israel for Hania killing, officials say. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei ordered retaliation after a humiliating security failure as Iran once again balances showing strength against the risk of escalation. On top of that, we also have Israel striking Beirut, saying it's killed Hezbollah commander, that's Fuad Shakur, in response to a rocket attack. It looks like both of these attacks, assuming this one on Iran is actually from Israel, is in retaliation for there was a rocket strike in Israel, killed several children. And so, look, this is war. Now there's going to be a retaliation for the retaliation, a retaliation for the retaliation. You see where this goes. This is what war is. I think it's silly for us to be like they're retaliating and now Iran's going to retaliate. No, it's the next step in an ongoing war. Iran ordering an attack on Israel should not be like a breaking headline. It should be Iran orders continuation of ongoing conflict with direct intervention or something to that effect. And sooner or later, we're going to get to the point where when there's active shooting between nations, and we already had the rocket fire between Israel and Iran, we're just going to say the war continues. So I suppose the big questions here are, Israel will be dragging the United States into a massive regional conflict that I think you got the John Boltons and the neocons salivating over and begging for.
I can't wait.
Before Donald Trump is going to be able to get in and tamper down any of this stuff, they're going to make this war happen so that he cannot.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of my theory, except in Ukraine. I figured if they thought Trump was going to win, they would try to make things so bad between Russia and Ukraine, get us so involved, and more or less drop all of that on his lap right before the election. And I guess now they have another opportunity to do that here with Israel. You know, Israel is a small country. They're surrounded by enemies on all sides. And I'm not so sure that we really understand what we're getting ourselves involved in. I think people vastly overestimate the ability of the U.S. military industrial complex to produce the amount of munitions that would be required to defend Israel against all those countries. And it just doesn't work that way. You know, they're burning through Patriot missiles like crazy. Our production capacity is about 30 to 35 a month. And if you're going to tool up a new factory to be making, you know, double, triple that amount, that takes years. That's not something that, it doesn't matter how much money you spend, it takes time to hire the employees, build the factories, et cetera. And meanwhile, you know, Iran is kind of going the other direction. I really think the whole Iran trying to get a nuclear weapon is one of the biggest psyops that we've fallen for. I think what they've realized is technologically that's really unfeasible for them. What makes more sense? For them to spend billions of dollars to produce one nuclear missile and fire it at Israel, which we would shoot out of the sky immediately, or they could take half that amount of money, a third of that amount of money. They could make 50,000 small capacity drones at a cost of maybe $25,000 to $40,000 each. And what are you going to do when they fly 10,000 drones? You know, last time they fired, 400 drones?
Yeah.
And we thought it was a great success that we shot them all out of the sky, but we spent $3 billion to take down maybe a few tens of millions of dollars worth of drones that they can manufacture by the hundreds.
That we're going to need to counter drone warfare with drones.
Correct, right.
You're going to need a net of drones and create a drone defense system.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm wondering, because on my morning show, I had some people super chat about this, is what's happening, the attack, assuming it is from Israel, because Donald Trump survived. And it's an interesting correlation, but the idea being, shortly after the assassination attempt, news broke that Iran was planning an assassination of Trump, and that kind of just disappeared overnight. Like, it blipped on the radar and then was gone.
It blipped. We looked at it, and then it was gone, yeah.
Because the narrative was, many people believe, Trump would have, if Trump were to have lost his life, then the media would have reported it was an Iranian-backed attack. When the FBI came out and said they found social media for the shooter that was anti-Semitic and anti-immigration, they would have argued that it was because of Trump's support of Israel. And then Nikki Haley becomes the nominee. Whether it's Biden or Kamala or Nikki Haley, they're all pro-war. Nikki Haley demands retaliation for Trump's life being taken, and that's how they get their casus belli for war with Iran. That didn't happen. So maybe that was never going to happen. Who knows? And now we have Israel striking Iranian territory, Iran retaliating. How much longer until Joe Biden bumps into a shelf and goes, and then accidentally hits the nuclear button and declares war on Iran?
Well, if Joe Biden stays in office, I mean, he doesn't have anything on his schedule. He doesn't seem to be doing anything at all. He was asked, I think they were asked in the briefing room today if he's still governing, and they were like, oh, yeah, for sure. He's definitely still governing. He's still in charge. So
he's
I
sleeping.
think, yeah, he's sleeping. He's on cold meds, whatever it is. He's definitely not playing golf. He's eating ice cream and sniffing little kids. I don't know.
Well, and
there was a video recently of him sniffing a kid. I can't believe it. It was from like a couple weeks ago or something.
Yeah.
And one of his senior advisors
thing.
just left to go join the Kamala Harris campaign. I mean, you're probably going to start seeing this mass defection.
We're going to see a lot more of that.
Which is fascinating because I think part of it is that they want Kamala Harris to be front and center. And so not only do they not want Joe Biden talking publicly because that has never helped them, but now they don't want anything to distract from her. So they're even more incentivized to keep him sort of, on the couch.
I think they see the next 3 months as a preview of the Kamala Harris presidency. So they're going to try to put her on the pedestal, make her appear to be the one in charge without actually saying it, and that way they can just slide, right through the election.
They could just slide her in.
Exactly.
They want her to look as presidential as possible so that it just looks like a fait accompli.
Yeah. And you see this with the messaging, especially on social media. Like the Biden account will tweet out something like, we accomplished this. Her account will immediately come in and say, yes, Joe Biden and I, me, the head of the Biden-Harris campaign or whatever.
Which is why I think it's really important to, if she wants to take on all his responsibilities now, including just drop into the scheduled debates and things like that, I think it's time to really hold her accountable for Biden's record.
But what's this narrative that the Kamala campaign is pushing where it's like, She comes out and she's like, I'm going to add more border guards, but Donald Trump opposes border guards. It's like her whole point is basically like, I may be the vice president, but I'm not going to do anything about anything right now. And Trump even says this. He's like, I don't understand. Like, she's the vice president.
You could do it now. Right?
She could do it now. What is
for?
she campaigning on?
Yeah, just do the thing.
Well, yeah, she's like, Trump opposes this. When? 4 years ago? What are you talking about?
And she'll talk about more recent border legislation that she'll be like, well, it was going to get passed, but then Trump directed all of his cronies to be against it. It's like, yeah, it's because it was a bad bill. Like, no one liked this
It's
bill.
just a way for them to put money into
politicking.
Creating legalized immigration.
Whether the bill is good or bad is immaterial, right? You can lie, you can claim one thing, you claim another. The point is, she's in office, he's not.
Right.
Well, Trump told his people to block it. Wait, you're the vice president. What are you going to do? Nothing's going to change. You get elected. What's different? You can't go to Joe Biden right now and say, hey, do thing. Right. Or is the argument that when you get elected, all of a sudden Trump's going to stop trying to meddle in politics? What's the argument?
Meanwhile, the other thing, too, is she has the exact same staff as Biden. As Hannah Claire just pointed out, she's getting his, White House staffers now. So if they weren't capable of getting any of this stuff done for the past 3.5 years, why would they be able to get it done over the next 4?
And a lot of Biden staff also are veterans of the Obama administration, right?
Well, it's the continuation.
The same
Kamala is just a continuation.
It's the same thing as Obamacare. You got to pass the bill to see what's in it. So they don't want to do it now because that would ruin things prior to the election. And they know that this bill, all it's going to do is, as I said, they're going to put a bunch of money into hiring border agents to process immigrant applications. They're not going to put any money into actually stopping the flow of people across the border. They're just going to say, well, hey, look, illegal immigration has dropped by 50%. Yeah, that's because you've got a guy filling out paperwork and just making them all legalized.
You're rolling out a second CB1 app to make it easier for people to cross the border.
So it appears that it's less, but now we have all the same number of people.
Right.
Back to the story, though. The question I have for you guys is, do we have war with Iran before November? Open war, U.S. involvement.
I think it's more likely that we'll have open involvement in Ukraine, personally, before.
Yeah.
I think that one's going far worse. But it'll depend. It really depends on what Iran does in response to this. If they do the same thing that they did last time at a larger scale, then if they actually manage to land some hits in Tel Aviv or some other large city, I think it could go from 0 to 100 in a week.
It's tough because who actually wants to engage in a conflict to that degree? Iran certainly doesn't.
No.
Does Israel? I mean, the United States does.
Sure.
And so that's what Iran's concern is. If they strike on Israel, the U.S. immediately intervenes. And then I take a look at their building. The U.S. tried building that beachhead, which failed.
Yeah.
Which is,
Pier.
$230
million.
That Gaza Pier thing?
Yeah.
Total failure.
Yep. But I think the point of that is the U.S. has the Mediterranean route for bringing shipments into Israel, which they can use as a staging ground for a war with in the region. Not to mention Iraq and Afghanistan, depending on what access we still have there.
Yeah. Like I said, it's hard. It'll really depend on what Iran decides to do in response. I can't imagine that they're going to do nothing, but do they really want to escalate it to the point where they're in a direct conflict? I don't know.
But it's also Lebanon, too.
Yeah, it's also Lebanon. It's tough. Those countries, you'd think that all of them would band together against Israel, but there's a lot of, internal conflict between those countries, a lot of religious differences. You have the Shiites, you have the Sunnis. So it's not easy to say that they'll all just get together and do it. But at some point, even the worst of enemies can become friends for the purposes of defeating what they think is the greater enemy. And, Israel's a tiny country. I mean, it's only 40 miles across in some places. So
I think the big risk we're facing is Iran's retaliation could come in the form of subterfuge, cyber attacks.
Yeah.
And so there could be economic damage that is more difficult for us to understand. It is entirely likely that there's been industrial accidents that have actually been cyber attacks, and we wouldn't know. They're not going to tell us. Because if the U.S. government came out and said, remember that refinery that blew up? That was actually Iran targeting us through cyber warfare. They'd have to admit that we don't have the security and the defense, and that U.S. actions led to a retaliation for some reason. So likely they'll just ignore it. The American citizens are going to face some kind of detriment from Iran, who will try to cause problems for us. They probably are doing it right now anyway. And then we don't even know what's going on because the government doesn't want to admit its failures.
Yeah, and I think most people vastly overestimate the amount of cybersecurity that your average industrial facility has. I worked for an insurance company for 10 years, and they spent tens of millions of dollars on cybersecurity because they had personally identifiable information, things like that. But your average manufacturing facility, the problem is a lot of the machinery and equipment that we use, those companies are pushing all of us to connect those things to the internet so that they can do remote troubleshooting and help solve problems. You can track manufacturing data, all that kind of thing. But the firewalls that exist for programmable logic controllers is very rudimentary. That to me, that worries me more than even an attack, say, on the electrical grid. I mean, that worries me as well. But I think we're spending a lot more money trying to shore up security in that area. But all of the individual manufacturers making everything we need for appliances, computers, cars, weapons, all that stuff. Most of these companies have absolutely no idea that they're even vulnerable to things like that.
Do you think that Americans or American policymakers' understanding of national security has pivoted with the internet age? Do they think that the most likely attack is a physical, attack from a different country, or do they realize that our online connection makes us vulnerable too?
I think the military knows it. Their stuff's very robust. They spend a lot of money trying to keep their computers from being able to be hacked, their comm systems, things like that. But again, how do you, I won't say force, because I certainly wouldn't want them to force that upon, industrial manufacturers, but most people don't even really understand that that's a risk. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of falls on the companies who are building the logic controllers and the machinery and the equipment. And I think they're just far behind the times. I don't think that they perceive that as, I think if you went to your average machinery manufacturing company and said, what are you guys doing to make sure that, my bullet assembly machine is unhackable? They would just look at you with a blank stare, because it's just not really on their radar. They're worried about production, workflow. They're trying to make the machines run faster, have less errors in your products, things like that. But I don't really think that they have any idea that that's even a risk.
Thanks for watching this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to check out the live show Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. on this channel. Subscribe and we'll see you all there.